Following video is the next in a series of tutorials about integrating Python scripting with ArcGIS. We will eventually get to a point where we are discussing the ArcPy module, which is what allows you to integrate the two. But before we get to that point, I wanted to do a series of videos just on some basic Python syntax so that when you're coding in ArcGIS, you have a fundamental understanding of the language. The disclaimer I'll always add in front of these videos with Python is I am not a programmer or coder by trade. I learned Python, within the context of ArcGIS, and then explored a little bit more outside of it to become more familiar with the language. But the manner in which I'm going to teach this is very much structured for beginners and people who eventually want to use the language within ArcGIS. So the video we're going to work on today is about functions and methods, which for lack of a better, metaphor, you could really think of as verbs that you're using on some of your objects and your operands. They're things that you can call on them to learn a little bit more about your object, also to maybe manipulate or change your object. And there's a couple that we're going to run through here to kind of teach. But before we start, let's just get a couple of variables in place. We'll say my int, and that can just equal 1. And say my string, and that will equal string. Oh, my string can equal string. And we'll say that our list can equal 1, 2, we'll say 4 and 5. What's going on with our list? Oh, my list equals 1, 2, 4, 5, and 5. Okay, good. So we can check these. Print my int, print my string, print my list. And it's good to run through print, right? Because that is one that we are actually quite familiar with. Print is one of the primary functions that's used, and its primary function, as you can imagine, as we've seen from video 1, is really just to take whatever's stored in your variable or string or integer and print it to the screen. A couple other primary ones that you should know about that are really good, I think, are type. There's another one I really like. And type, you'll notice it comes up in purple, indicating to you that it is a form of a function. Really what it wants is you to put some kind of object in there, and it's going to tell you what is it. Is it a string? Is it an integer? Is it a float? Right, so I go type my integer, and it returns to you as, in fact, an integer. And as you can see when you're working in idle, it didn't pop up this time, but remember we did it last time, it asked you for the object that you'd want to put in here, my string. It tells you it's that. As I said before, you can also use them to kind of learn a little bit more, right? So that's what we're doing here. We're learning about my string. Another important one you might want to do is len. Len just means length. Tell me how long my string is. Well, it happens to be 6 characters long. So there's a whole litany of these these verbs that you can learn, and you'll just want to Google or go to the Python documentation to be able to get the full breadth of them. I just want to go through a couple of the very important ones here that I'm going to split really into 3 categories. And I'm going to split them into converting between data types and things you can call on strings and things you can call on lists. When I get to the strings and the lists, I'm going to be talking about what are called methods. From a very functional purpose, there's not a whole lot that differentiates a function from a method. Other than a function, essentially you type the function first and then you call any object to it, whereas a method is explicitly run on an object. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. All right, so the first thing I want to show you is kind of conversions. You can see one I have down here of just the main ones I want to go over. And really the purpose of a conversion is just if you need to move from one data type right to another. So sometimes maybe what you'll see is you'll ask your user their input, we'll say. Remember we learned about raw input in a previous video. Right? Raw input from a user really means user, I'm going to prompt you and you're going to put something into the script for me. Right? And you give them what their prompt should be here. Enter a number. Right? So then, very cool, right? We run their input, it tells me that I should enter a number, and I'm going to enter, let's say, 9. Right, and then so maybe I'm going to try to add their input to the number 10, and what's going to happen is it's going to get me into trouble here. And so the reason that is, we can use one of the elements that we learned up here, one of the functions. We can say, well, what is the type of their input? And the type, it ends up being a string. Right? So anything that comes into you as raw input comes in as a string. And you can imagine a script where maybe you're asking someone to enter a number between 1 and 10 that you eventually want to add to things later, and so you need to turn it to an integer. So really that's the purpose of something like this. I could say int their input, or rather just redo this. Their input is now going to equal what it used to be, but turned into an integer. And now if I ask for the type of their input, I can very much see that it is, oops, what happened to it? Oh yeah, an integer, because I just turned it to an integer. So now their input plus 15, right, will give me 24, because they put in 9 plus that. So there's a whole bunch of them, right? So you can take a string, do that on a number, as long as it doesn't have a digit, right? And then it turns it into the string version of that. Another very interesting one that I like is list. In list, you can just enter a sequence of characters, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? And it'll turn them into a list where it demarcates it at each of the after each character. A little bit later, we're going to learn how you can build a list a little bit more complex. You can imagine you might eventually want to break the individual words down in a sentence into a list. He said, she said. Right, you'd want to turn that into a list. If you just use list right here, it's going to make it every character, right? So it's HE blank, SAID blank. But we'll learn a tool or a method a little bit later that allows you to build lists a little bit more complexly. Right, so those are the big important ones when you're converting between one data type and another. I think the other next category is ones that you call on strings. So I'm going to teach you a couple that I think are important to know. And really what these are, they're learning from strings or they're modifying strings in some way. And as you can notice, the primary difference here is they're called on the string. Right? So let's remind ourselves I had something called myString. My string just says string. Right? So I can call them on my string. MyString dot find. Right? Find says, okay, I'll find the index point of some element. So let's find a lowercase t. And it's going to come back and say a lowercase t can be found at the first index point, right? Remember, whenever you're indexing, it starts at 0. So 0, then 1, then 2. And so that's the syntax, essentially, of a method is they're called upon an object at the end from a period. Another one is replace is one you'll often see. So maybe I say myString.replace. And let's replace, ing with PE. We're going to turn it into the word stripe. Now, remember, as we learned kind of in our first lessons, that just like tuples, strings are immutable. You can't actually change a string. The only way to change a string is to reset it. Right? So it looks here like I made a change, but this is only happening cosmetically. If I say print my string, well, that's not a variable. Print my string. Right? It still is string. It hasn't changed itself to strip yet. So I really have to almost reset it. I have to say my string equals what it used to be, but I'm going to replace ing.ip. And now if I print my string. All right. You can also use upper, right? Upper or lower. I make it uppercase, make it lowercase. We can try to figure out, does something have a digit, right? Is it a number based or is it alphanumeric based? So my string dot is digit. I'm simply asking, is it a number? No, it's not, right? But if I said 1, 2, 3 dot is digit, it would say true because that's involving digits. Right? So that's a cool test you can almost use if someone's giving you an input to find out, is this something that I would be able to convert to an integer based on that. So the next thing that I want to learn is lists, and lists have a bunch of cool things. Now remember that lists are mutable, they are changeable. So up here, I said my string upper, but if I call my string, it's still going to be lowercase, right? I have to set it equals what it used to be dot upper in order for it to work. So, but lists, they change right away, right? So if I say my list, just to remind you it's 1, 2, 4, 5, one of the first ones I want to talk about is append. Right, so append simply says, take me the list and append something to the end of it. So I'm going to append the number 6. It appears nothing happens, but then when I print my list, 6 is permanently at the end. Right, so lists you can change at any moment. You can also insert something at any point in a list. So I say my list and insert. It's going to want to know first the index point, right? So 0, 1, 2. I'll put it at the second index point, and I'll put the number 3. Now I print my list, there'll be a 3 after the 1 and the 2. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then a final one that's interesting with list is reverse. My list reverse. And as you can imagine, simply just reverses the order of your list. So as I said in the beginning, you're really going to want to consult the Python documentation. Always kind of have that at your side as a dictionary so you can learn the full breadth of the methods and the functions that you can call and whether they are string or list specific. But these are some really kind of handy ones to have around in the basic syntax. And the follow-up video to this will be a little bit smaller. We'll actually learn how you can create your own function that you can call at any time.